Feels good. Of course, now we're going to go back to item 80, where you may not feel that government's working as effectively. And that item is an informational update on issues related to the Rancho, the LPG facility. And I know we've got a staff presentation, and I have got a number of speaker cards that have been spelled out on this as well.
Yes, our senior attorney, Catherine Colson, will be giving staff's presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just going to be giving an overview of our staff report. The State Lands Commission has general oversight authority over sovereign lands granted by the legislature to local entities in trust for the benefit of the state. In 1911, the legislature granted the City of Los Angeles certain tied and submerged lands in the area known as the Port of Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners oversees the management and operation of the port. The board's jurisdiction is limited to the Harbor District, which it manages in accordance with the public trust doctrine and the city's statutory grant to promote maritime commerce, navigation, fisheries, and public access to the waterfront. San Pedro and Wilmington community members have expressed public health and safety concerns about the operations of the Rancho LPG holdings facility that stores butane and propane in an area near the Port of Los Angeles. The facility, which has two 12.5 million gallon refrigerated tanks and 5 60,000-gallon horizontal storage tanks, has operated since 1973. Although the facility is located on private property, Rancho LPG uses a railroad spur on property owned by the port to transport its commodities. It also transports products via pipeline and trucks. Members of the community have expressed concerns that the butane and propane are extremely hazardous materials, they're highly explosive, and represent potential threats to life, health, loss of business, private and public property and infrastructure from an explosion or fire. The Rancho LPG facility, as I mentioned, is located on private property, not on land under the Commission's jurisdiction or on land under the port's jurisdiction. Several decades ago, the port acquired the railroad spur property that Rancho LPG uses to transport commodities to and from the facility to the Pacific Harbor Line. And the Pacific Harbor Line is the common carrier that operates the rail line through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. The port holds the railroad spur property as an asset of the trust. Rancho LPG has a revocable permit from the port to use the railroad spur. As a part of this revocable permit, the port receives indemnification from Rancho, they require insurance, and they receive approximately $14,000 in annual rent. Additionally, the port requires significant insurance from the Pacific Harbor Line and the railroad companies that operate at the port. Issues surrounding the Rancho permit and Rancho LPG's use of the railroad spur track have been brought to the Commission's attention in June and October of 2014 at both those meetings. One significant update since those meetings is that the Surface Transportation Board recently provided additional clarity on the port's role related to the port's regulating the use of the railroad spur track. In 2016, the Surface Transportation Board considered a petition requesting a declaratory order against the port for issuing the Rancho permit without environmental review under CEQA. The Surface Transportation Board ruled that it had exclusive jurisdiction over the regulation of rail transportation pursuant to the Interstate Commerce Act, and noted that federal law broadly preempted state and local regulation to avoid interference with interstate commerce. The ruling acknowledged that state and local entities retained police powers to protect public health and safety. The Surface Transportation Board also acknowledged that any exercised police power must be exercised in a way that, one, is non-discriminatory and generally applied, and two, does not unreasonably interfere with rail transportation. In summary, the Surface Transportation Board found that the rail spur track is subject to the exclusive jurisdiction of the Surface Transportation Board, that the Pacific Harbor Line is a common carrier subject to the Surface Transportation Board's jurisdiction, that the common carriers, like the Pacific Harbor Line, have an obligation to transport hazardous materials, and that any terms in the port permits attempting to restrict the transportation of hazardous materials are preempted by federal law. And this decision by the Surface Transportation Board is consistent with a recent California Supreme Court opinion in the Friends of Eel River that noted that federal preemption of railroad regulation does not prevent local governments from using their police powers to impose health, safety, and environmental regulations that apply to railroads, such as land use planning, CEQA, or applicable building and fire codes. However, such regulations are not permissible if they discriminate against rail transportation, purport to govern rail transportation directly, or prove unreasonably burdensome to rail transportation. Another issue that has been raised in relation to the Rancho LPG facility is concerns the underground pipeline that runs from the Rancho LPG site to the Valero refinery. The pipeline is owned by Ultramar Valero, and it travels from the facility through the cities of Harbor City and Wilmington to the Valero refinery. This pipeline is 6 inches in diameter and transports butane to and from the refinery from the Rancho LPG facility. According to the port, it does not have a permit or a lease with Ultramar for this pipeline, and based on the records that the commission staff has been able to locate, it appears that Ultramar holds a permanent pipeline easement for the portion of the pipeline that runs through the port property in the Berth 200 area. Staff also confirmed with the Office of the State Fire Marshal that this pipeline is under its jurisdiction for inspection and regulation, and that the pipeline was last inspected in 2012. They also noted that there's a new law that requires pipelines to be inspected annually, and that it is currently slated for inspection at the last quarter of 2017. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions, and I also believe that staff from the Port of Los Angeles is here and available for questions as well.
How do we want to do this? Jennifer, you want to amplify, or should I ask the port, the LA, perhaps?
No, if I may suggest an order.
Yeah.
I would recommend that we start with Ms. Janet Gunter and start with some of the concerned community members that are located here in San Diego. Then move to the San Pedro location so we can hear from other members of the community that were not able to travel down here to be here in person. And then I do believe we have representatives of the Rancho LPG facility and the Port of LA that may want to say a few words or answer questions.
Does that make sense, Commissioners?
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and staff. First of all, I do want to thank Commissioner Yee and Ann Baker and Jennifer Lucchese for their interest in working with us on this very, very important issue. I also want to apologize in advance because I've never done a PowerPoint before, and we struggle with this, and I'm going to let Chris help me here in trying to get this done. So if you could just start it, Chris, that'd be great. Okay, I think we're not there. That's the second. We want the first. Yes, there we go. Telltale here, preventing the inevitable disaster, disregarding responsibility of Plains Rancho LPG. I'm representing today the San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners United, and this homeowners group has been instrumental in their opposition to this facility since 1977. It took them 3 years to find out that this thing was going within 1,000 feet of their own neighborhoods because it was issued an emergency exemption by the Nixon administration under the false assumption that propane would become America's energy source of the future and wean us off of foreign oil. So it was, the phrase is used a lot with this facility that they are grandfathered in and they are in compliance with all existing regulations. That's not true. This facility was entered with multiple exemptions from multiple different areas, and it exists now only because of those exemptions. So it will never be in actual compliance. So I want to get back to the EIR on this, which there was a very, very deficient EIR that was performed for this, but it fails to it doesn't respond to the transportation of rail at all in that report. All it was a receiving storage facility for gas that was supposed to come from Algeria. I think they had a couple of shiploads that came in, and that was it, because that was the end of Nixon and his energy policies, and the original facility, Petrolane, went belly up in 1980s and was assumed by AmeriGas, who was the predecessor to Plains All-American Pipeline. Plains All-American Pipeline, operating under the name Rancho LPG, purchased the facility in 2008 when the facility was already 35 years old, an antiquated facility, and one that everyone knew was a problem. So every legislator and public official over all these years, it took the neighborhoods 3 years to understand what was now in their laps of the community. When they found this out, they began to fight. And so Plains knew full well when they came in that the agencies, the government officials, everybody acknowledged that this thing never should have been put in the first place. But they went ahead and purchased it knowing that, with an end goal of their own. So that the slide that you just saw, the first slide, Chris, if we can go back real quick, that's a rail accident. That rail accident happened precisely on the Westmont rail spur area that's under contract and permit with the port. That's your after acquired asset that we've been talking about. And Plains Rancho provides you with $1 million liability on those 30,000 gallon rail cars of propane that have a half a mile blast radius. In fact, 0.58 miles. So looking at San Bruno, you can see that $1 million is not going to go a long way. San Bruno affected a city block and is cost in excess of $2.7 billion at this point. Next slide, please. I took this out of your mission statement because I think the most important thing is the first paragraph. Uses that do not protect or promote public trust values are not water dependent, which this is not because they are not a tenant of the port any longer, or oriented and exclude rather than facilitate public access and use are not consistent with the trust under which the lands are held. Okay, you have the right to look at this. This is public trust use of land for a private entity. And without the use of that rail and the pipeline that traverses port property, there would be no Rancho LPG because they are storing off-site now the excess butane for refineries that are miles away. That use that they are doing now is completely different than what the EIR was analyzed. So there's no relation now to this business operation that's currently being held. Next slide, please.
And forgive me, just because we do have the time limit, which I didn't start for 3 minutes, so we're at 6, but I'm trying to be generous.
Jennifer told me I had 8 minutes.
Presentation. How long?
She told me 8 minutes.
Okay. Well, you should take over then. I love it. I'm going to defer. It's all yours.
All right.
Good.
So it only took me
Whatever
like
she says
5
goes.
hours to put this thing together. All right.
good.
So,
All good.
all right, next slide because we're anxious here. Okay, this slide, and I'll go quickly on this. This shows you the schools, and unfortunately those little floaters moved around so they're not real accurate. It also shows you the red is the rail line, and the red up at the top is the pipeline, but that's not an accurate description of where that pipeline goes. But it gives you a clue of where it extends. And you see the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, you see 600 new homes now being built in the shadow of those tanks. And we'll get onto and the sport fields, obviously, there as well. Next slide. Okay, this one is, Noel Weiss will follow me on this. What this is about is showing that there are 4 segments of this rail that have very disparate ownership issues. And he will relate to those later on. I just wanted to see on the right, if you look at the blue line, if you look at the pink line, if you look at the red line is the rail spur, and the yellow one below is the main rail. Next slide. Okay, if you would click onto the first for the video, short video. I hope we have sound. This is a derailment. and it's in Murdoch, Texas. It's impossible for anybody's words to describe the kind of massive blast that we're talking about.
Chooses to stay behind, a half mile from the flames.
The fire is making a sound like a jet liner taking off. Something apparently blew up just a couple of minutes ago and started this big roar of flames and the sound of a jet liner.
What the news crew doesn't know is that the noise they are hearing is a warning of an impending levee carrying propane gas. Moments after the reporter signs off, 30,000 gallons of boiling propane push the tank's metal walls to the breaking point.
Okay, take on. Leave it up.
The news crew feels the heat wave from the blast. In this blast, rockets nearly 3/4 of a mile into a
On to
field.
the next, please. The next slide into the next video. Okay, this is a 3-minute video.
Rancho has very volatile, explosive, flammable gas.
There's no way to make these tanks safe.
It also has very high risk because of the population and community that surrounds it.
We're not talking about Iraq here, we're talking about public safety, and that's a bipartisan issue.
One of the tanks fails within a 3-mile radius of that tank. Approximately 500,000 people live. That's high risk.
Imagine a blast at the Los Angeles harbor the size of 50 atomic bombs. A fire that cannot be put out with water, that would trigger a cascading inferno, igniting the multitude of storage tanks, petroleum factories, underground gas pipes, and everything in its path.
You have to pay attention to the details. We have to start thinking in the long term instead of the short term.
Imagine the loss of Long Beach Harbor and how it would devastate the economy, turning Southern California into another Detroit. We've got 2 ultra-hazardous butane tanks containing over 25 million gallons and propane bullet tanks containing 300,000 gallons. Imagine how easily these tanks could be penetrated by a rocket-launched grenade or a high-powered rifle. These tanks are a 1/4 mile from the port of Los Angeles and would make a high-value target for any terrorist. And these tanks are built on sandbanks called liquefaction areas. They stand 150 feet from a rupture zone with a potential 7.3 magnitude quake at hand. This propane and butane is stored above ground in refrigerated tanks. And when the liquid is exposed to air, it immediately vaporizes to over 230 times its original volume. A leak from a rupture would flow down the sandbank into the storm drain and spill out into the harbor. Butane and propane burn at temperatures hotter than 3,200 degrees and cannot be extinguished by water. No one, not even firefighters, can approach the blaze.
A large amount of propane in storage tanks that can be affected by strong earthquakes, ignited. That's a natural hazard, or human hazards. Hubris, arrogance, greed, ignorance, and indolence is a disaster sooner or later.
There is a way that we can change what's coming. We can heed the warnings.
You can
Or
cut it now, Chris,
we could be
please.
content to just sit back.
Okay, the next one, we will, for the sake of expediency, I can't remember what's up next. Could you put me the slide up? Okay, this we have to say. All right, this is a very short news clip on ABC, and this is our mayor, LA Mayor Garcetti, speaking to this issue.
ABC7 presents Eyewitness Newsmakers with Adrian Albert.
Let's go to our next viewer question. Janet Gunter of San Pedro. While you are pursuing stronger earthquake standards for buildings, how can you justify not doing anything about such flagrant extreme hazards as the massive and highly explosive butane and propane gas storage facility near LA Harbor, whose 40-plus-year-old tanks are built to a seismic substandard of 5.5 to 6.0, while sitting on an LA Planning Department earthquake rupture zone that has a 7.3 magnitude potential?
Well, I'm glad you brought up our earthquake report, which we finished the year on. Dr. Lucy Jones gave us a great roadmap to make the city safer, to save our housing, to get our water and our communications infrastructure in an earthquake taken care of. In San Pedro, it does meet the existing codes when it was built, but the simple answer is money. I would love the federal or state government to give me the estimated $1 billion to move that tank or the hundreds of millions it would take. We simply can't take that out of cops, firefighters, street paving, and the responsibility for those sorts of things have to happen at the state level. One of the reasons Dr. Lucy Jones suggested maybe a state bond would be necessary, not just for places like San Pedro and cities like LA, but up and down the state to help with the pipes and some of the infrastructure that can rupture and be very dangerous in an
Well, who
earthquake.
stores that in that facility? I mean, couldn't the city order it shut down, or just...
We don't have that jurisdiction, no. It is a private company that has that there, and because it was built to existing standards, it does meet the letter of the law. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous. We have some of those same concerns, but we need really federal and state money to help that because the city, just simply put, doesn't have that level of money.
All right.
So I hope you can kind of understand our frustration with this issue. The next slide, please. I won't play this video. I'll just let you know that there is a video that shows this Tianjin explosion in China, which was in a port town. There were multiple hazardous chemicals in there, including propane gas. The blast has now been established as a 21-ton TNT blast. 25 million gallons of butane gas equates to a TNT equivalency that is over 1,000 times greater than what was endured there, and it affected a 2-mile radius. The facility has been claiming they have a half-mile blast radius because they're using a non-responsive impound basin that would capture less than 1% of liquefied gas when it vaporizes in that basin. Next slide, please. So what we're asking you to please meet your obligation as guardians of the public trust by ensuring that public safety is being protected and that there is no burden of liability to the people of the state with regard to this operation. This is the economic engine of the state of California. Assert authority with regard to the port's management of all 4 segments of the rail use associated with Plains Rancho LPG and the pipeline servicing the outside refineries of Valero and Tesoro. Next slide, please. Expedite a legal opinion from Attorney General Becerra on the state's liability from an accident stemming from Plains Rancho's use of public trust lands for their private business operation, discontinue use of public trust property on the pipeline and the rail access until a comprehensive risk analysis and audit are completed reflecting degree of risk and any costs associated with that risk. Immediately instruct State Lands Commission staff to agendize all approvals and authorizations given to existing leases, contracts, and permits associated with Plains All-American Pipeline, Rancho LPG LLC operations for SLC review to ensure that the port has complied with all proper laws and procedures in granting them. Next slide. In closing, lurking below the surface of these catastrophic events are often political and economic instabilities, resource constraints, and organizational inefficiencies at global and local levels. And so, warning signs often go ignored and red flags unheralded. Ignoring this neon red flag for so many years is no longer tolerable. Continuing to do so, in fact, is criminal. Next slide, please, and the end. This disaster is entirely preventable, and we look to you and whatever you can do, and I understand I've been told about your constraints, but we can no longer accept the excuse there's nothing we can do. This is going to happen. It's not an if, it's just a when. So please, please do whatever you can to assist. Thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you.
Jennifer, why don't you've got the speaker's card, so what order do you think works now? Respecting the folks in San Pedro that want to speak as well. And I don't know, do we have that list as well, or are these the individuals, or is there an additional list?
We do have an additional list, and it'll be moderated by our staff at the San Pedro
site. Okay.
location. So
Perfect.
what I would recommend is there are 2 more speakers from the community that are located here, Mr.
Perfect.
Weiss and Mr. Belamonte. So I would recommend they be allowed to speak, and then we can move to the San Pedro location.
You know, with all due respect, maybe it would be better to have the San Pedro people speak first. This way, it would be important to give us an opportunity to respond to whatever they may say. But if that's not all right, I'm happy to go forward now. Huh? Okay. I just need that one particular slide. I think it was the second slide that had the map of the railroad, the railroad segment on it. It was I think the second or the third that you had put up there. No, the one after that, I think. Next one.
Is this wrong? Under the Janet Rancho.
It's under, yeah.
And then.
Next one there. One. Perfect. Okay. Is it third member here, or is the governor's representative here, or state finance officer? Oh, hi, how are you? Okay, again, recognizing that politics is basically the art of the possible, we recognize the fact that this commission obviously cannot control what Rancho does on its property. The thing that I wanted to point out that's it's extremely important and relevant and directly appropriate to your jurisdiction, power, right, and authority are these 4 rail segments. It's kind of a walk between the raindrops deal, commissioners, because what we're talking about is, it used to be privately owned, the Alameda Corridor came in, they basically eminent domain the whole thing, they took control of the Union Pacific, and then they said, these particular rail segments, we don't need anymore. Therefore, we're giving them over to the port. That made them, after acquired Tidelands assets, that put it within your jurisdiction. It's maybe a unique situation in the entire state, but it is what it is, and that gives you the right, power, and authority to control their use. Just like the other 50 or 60 lease items that you had on your consent calendar, you approve of the leases, you approve of the terms, you approve of the conditions. Segment 1, and the staff report's a little misleading because it says railroad along Gaffey Street. That's not correct. The segment within the Rancho property there that's in blue, that's within the boundaries of the Rancho property. So you own rail lines, or you own Tidelands Trust assets after acquired. That rail line is within the boundaries of Rancho's property. Very unique situation. Now, the city may have the history of where that came from. Do they own it in fee, or is it just simply an easement? But the bottom line is you got an ownership interest. Meanwhile, there's no lease for that. There's no compensation paid to the state for that. The liability still exists for that. It is an absolute legal mess, and it needs to get cured. Secondly, when Rancho properties exit that sin or that light blue turquoise area, that's the southern boundary of Rancho's property. That rail line then goes through there to the rail spur, which is in the red, and then following over the rail spur to the south is PHL's operating line throughout the port, which they operate pursuant to an operating agreement that was signed in December 1997. Now, so in that sin area, the blue area, again, same deal. There, you've got a private company, PHL, using your property, not paying you a dime for it. You are incurring the liability, God forbid, should a train car carrying 33,000 gallons of propane explode, there'd be an accident. You think $1 million worth of insurance is going to do any good? I don't think so. The idea is, again, what we're talking about is public health, welfare, and safety. And the rail spur is the one that is signed incredibly with Rancho, Plains Rancho, not in the port, rather than with PHL. And by the way, we should also note for the record that Plains Rancho is the same company that operated the Santa Barbara pipeline, it's a criminal indictment by the state and by the district attorney of Santa Barbara County for 46 counts of negligence in the operation of that pipeline. That's the same company that we're talking about here. Same company, Plains, that operated in Alberta, Canada, the largest oil spill in 2012 in 36 years, criminally indicted there. We got a company, we got a problem, and we need to basically get it resolved. My contention, our request is, one, you have to stay on top of this. There's no question in terms of the politics of the situation. let's do what we can do. Number one, we have an operating agreement between PHL and the port on Tidelands Trust assets. That is your jurisdiction. It's never been approved. It's never been reviewed by this commission. I want an agendized item, respectfully, where the terms of that agreement are reviewed, the scope of the indemnity, their provisions are reviewed, the protections of the state are preserved and guaranteed, and that adequate compensation is paid. Likewise, the operating agreement. What this will do as a practical matter, commissioners, is keep the pressure on a company that is under a tremendous cash crisis. Our concern is that they're going to start cutting costs in their operation. This is a money-losing proposition, commissioners. They're not making any money there at all. In fact, it's losing about $1.1 million a day. They originally bought the facility with the expectation of developing the Port Pier 400 program. That basically went by the wayside. So now it's sitting there, and it needs to be, the legal relationships need to be clarified. The circumstances need to be resolved. You all need to understand before there's an explosion and I'm not talking about in the facility, I'm just talking about the rail cars, because when those rail cars are sitting there next to the facility being loaded, it's the functional equivalent of another storage facility. And you have the right, you have the power, you have the authority to at least investigate the facts. And then with respect to, again, another couple of quick points. One, you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, Madam Controller, you are in a position independently to ask, using your office, the State Attorney General for a written legal opinion, Attorney General opinion, that basically says, what is the liability, not the liability, what is the right of the state to regulate this intra-state, this intra-port rail line? And we're talking, in this day and age, sanctuary cities, we're talking about states' rights, we're talking about all the important rights that the state has, and this is on top of everything else, a Tidelands Trust asset. And that belongs to the state. What rights do the state have in this situation? I think you need a legal opinion of that issue from the Attorney General. You can request it again in your individual capacity. I think the commission could put on its agenda a request for that. Let Rancho tell you why you shouldn't be entitled to it. That's the other point. And also, again, the accounting of all these revenues that, frankly, you should have had for the use of your property. It's an indirect subsidy. It's not proper. It's not appropriate. And I think by doing those things that you do have the power to do, I think it's going to put the kind of pressure on Rancho and Plains to make sure that if they decide to cut dime one in their operation of this facility, forget it altogether. Finally, the report in the staff report talks about, and likewise, same with the pipeline, but they also talk about, commissioners, the idea of it's not your job to micromanage. I agree. It's not your job to micromanage, but you can certainly macromanage, and that's what you do when you approve the leases. And it's not an unreasonable request for you all to agendize this and put these leases and these operating permits and these operating agreements on your agenda and approve them just like you do the 50 or 70 or whatever else are on your agenda. And again, your consideration is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Very well. So we're gonna have to, and I appreciate both presentations. So I'm gonna make sure we abide by the time rules, just out of respect to everybody else. And those of you that are waiting to speak, I imagine you appreciate that. And until you have the chance to speak, then you're going to be a little less sensitive. But I want to extend that to everybody, and so we'll be a little bit tighter, not a lot. Excuse me, not a little bit, a lot. With that, who do you have up next?
We have Mr. Bellamonte.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, I heard one of you commissioners say earlier that you want to make sure that you're protecting the public health and safety of the people of the state. You're not doing that with regard to this facility, the Rancho LPG facility. You have deferred authority on this facility to the Port of Los Angeles. You might as well defer to the devil. The Port of Los Angeles is not going to do anything about the LPG tanks. They are as intransigent and as corrupt as you can get. They're a corrupt body. And if you're going to defer to them, you're also acting as though you are corrupt. That's my opinion. There has been a pattern of continual negligence, not only on this issue, but on a lot of issues regarding Port of Los Angeles. The issues of China shipping, pollution. This is just one example. There is also the question of the capacity of these storage tanks. 12.5 million gallons in each of these tanks. That is 25 million gallons total. 25 million gallons. One tank car with 30,000 gallons has the blast radius of a half a mile. How is it possible that this facility that has the potential to store 25 million gallons of gas can have the equivalent blast radius of half a mile? It's ridiculous. There is also a comparable facility in Bakersfield that contains 22 million gallons in 5 tanks that it's run by Energen. It has a blast radius of 3.36 miles. 3.36 miles. That is 22 million gallons, okay? These numbers don't add up. They cannot be reconciled. They cannot be reconciled. This commission has a responsibility to protect the safety of people who live in San Pedro. You are ignoring your responsibility, and so is the whole state of California. I love this state of California. I honestly believe that we have the finest state in the union here. But if there is ever an accident at that tank facility, there are going to be thousands of deaths, and this state is going to be sued into oblivion. Oblivion, seriously. You need to do something. This state, this commission, the authorities of this state have been given adequate warning and repeated warning. Please do your jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here before we go to San Pedro? So why don't we head over to San Pedro, take a virtual walk over.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Can you hear me? We've been having some feedback problems, so I'm hoping everybody can hear me there in San Diego.
Okay.
My name is Reed Bajano. I'm a public land management specialist at the Commission. Next to me, I have Jamie Garrett, staff attorney with the Commission. I would like to remind all the public speakers here in San Pedro, when you reach the podium, please announce your name and look directly at the screen. And again, do respect the time limit. We have quite a bit.
Yeah, guys,
First up,
just very briefly, if I could interject, can you guys hear me? Looks like you can. Doesn't sound like you can, however. The audio is not working at all, and we need the audio to work in order to get a record of our conversation. And so let's work on that. Yeah, so is there anyone else here that wishes to speak as we work on that audio? Do you need us to shut up, excuse my language, in order to figure that out, or can we do both things at once? You guys need us? No. You know, oh, good. So you'll keep working on that. Anyone else here? I know there's a representative of the Port of Los Angeles. I imagine has some thoughts after the last speaker comments. But I don't know if anyone else is here that wishes to speak on this item.
We do have representatives from the port and from the Rancho LPG facility, Mr. Chair, but I think they wanted to go after the community members went so that they could answer questions.
Some stuff up.
And
all right.
yeah.
All right. Is that right? Whoever, okay, you're all sitting together, I see, all right, good. We'll be patient. So let us know, and you want to skip ahead?
We could
as you guys
skip
figure
ahead.
this out, let's skip to the next item as you guys, and we apologize to everyone in San Pedro for the technical difficulties. Let's suspend conversation on this, and we'll move to item 83.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Can we skip
as long
to-
as it's a good one.
I hope so, but you be the judge of that. How about 84, because that won't require a PowerPoint?
Even
so
better.
We can...
That's a really good one, actually. Let's do 84, thanks. And that's a memorandum, Chico Land Trust.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Wendy Hall, and I'm here to present Staff Report 84, which recommends the Commission authorize the execution of a memorandum of agreement between the California State Lands Commission and the Bolsa Chica Land Trust regarding the Bolsa Chica Lowlands Restoration Project. The Bolsa Chica Lowlands Restoration Project is the largest coastal wetland restoration in Southern California history. born out of a collaborative partnership with 7 other state and federal agencies through an interagency agreement to restore and preserve over 900 acres of degraded wetlands in the Bolsa Chica lowlands of Orange County. The project restored over 600 acres of marine and wetland habitat as mitigation for the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, restoring part of what had historically been a vast estuarine ecosystem. The Commission holds the land title and administers the management funds and performs general management oversight for the project on behalf of the other state and federal partner agencies pursuant to the interagency agreement. 10 years of post-restoration monitoring has shown that the project has meaningfully increased the availability of tidal habitat for a variety of vegetative, invertebrate, fish, and avian species, including 23 endangered and special status species. The project is also listed by the Environmental Protection Agency as a critical habitat for fish and migrating birds on the Pacific Flyway. In addition to a valuable ecological resource, the Bolsa Chica lowlands also today provide a valuable public resource. Educational groups, nonprofit organizations, and the general public frequent the site throughout the year, with as many as 80,000 members of the general public visiting the wetlands each year. The greatest challenge the Bolsa Chica Wetlands Project faces today is a lack of sufficient funding for long-term management. The project restoration design requires the management of an open ocean inlet, water control structures, nest sites, berms, and other features to ensure the continued functioning of the wetlands and protect the biological benefits gained by the restoration investment. Other ongoing management costs include on-site California Department of Fish and Wildlife staff, repairs, maintenance, and consultant contracts for a total operational cost of up to $3 million a year annually. These costs have proven to be greater than the original design contemplated, and the original funds set aside for ongoing management of the restored wetland are inadequate to address the long-term sustainability of the restoration as designed. Commission staff, along with our other state and federal agency partners, continue to work diligently to identify potential funding sources for the long-term sustainability of these wetlands. The staff report before you today is an example of these continuing efforts. Commission staff are collaborating with the Bolsa Chica Land Trust, a local nonprofit organization in Orange County, to seek grant funding for a sustainability alternative study. The Land Trust has graciously agreed to utilize their resources to apply for these grants. The purpose of the study is to analyze the existing wetland system and physical parameters and identify alternatives to enhance habitat functions, create climate resiliency, and reduce operations and management costs to achieve greater long-term sustainability for the project. The proposed memorandum of agreement further describes the respective authorities and obligations of the parties in the development and implementation of grant applications and the sustainability alternative study. In addition to these current grants, other staff efforts to obtain funding sources include grant applications in prior years, although the Commission staff was not successful in receiving any grant funding with these previous applications. However, this year we were successful in receiving a one-time appropriation of $1 million for the 2017-18 fiscal year, which will allow the Commission to continue the operations and management responsibilities of the project through the end of this current fiscal year. Staff have also collaborated with the Port of Los Angeles to execute a memorandum of intent in January of this year to establish a mechanism to receive $2.5 million in funding from the port toward the development and approval of eelgrass mitigation credits in exchange for future credits to the port. Staff are currently working with the Port of Los Angeles to develop an implementing agreement pursuant to this MOI. This concludes my staff report. Thank you. I'm available for any questions.
Good. It all makes sense to me, except I don't know how we spend $1 million a year. But that's another conversation. I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you were successful getting $1 million for this fiscal year. But where's that expenditure lie?
The greatest expenditure ongoing is the need to maintain the open ocean inlet, and so we are doing an annual dredging event, which runs about $1 million a year.
Got it.
So the
All right.
overall operating costs are actually
That
greater
helps.
than $1 million.
That helps on make you understand. Okay, good. Good to know. Beyond that, this makes absolute sense. Encourage you to collaborate to get more resources, continue good work. Without it, we'll struggle. So with that, is there anyone here that wishes to speak ill of this idea or well of it? Neither. We'll close public comment. Items in the hands of the commission. Is there any comments or motion? Motion seconded without objection. Thank you very much. We will move item 84, and that brings us to you, sir.
Okay.
What say you? How you doing?
What if you announced for them to do their public comment, we could do them all in one line and...
We'll make it happen?
Okay.
All right, you guys, San Pedro, you're all set out there? Can you hear us? If you can, let us know. There you are. You look great, we just can't hear you.
Go.
We'll be patient.
That's... Oh, on my bad on that one.
All right.
To the screen. My name is Reed Bajano. I'm a public land management specialist with the commission. Next to me, I have Jamie Garrett, staff attorney for the commission. And with that, let's get to it. First up, we have Gail McLaughlin. And following, we have Jesse Marquez.
Hello, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom and members of the California State Lands Commission. My name is Gail McLaughlin. I'm the former mayor of Richmond, California. I'm making this statement to demand that you, Lieutenant Governor Newsom, and members of the State Lands Commission take immediate action to terminate the catastrophic risk that the Rancho LPG facility represents for the lives of the people of San Pedro, Long Beach, and the Los Angeles area, and to the economy of the state of California. Lieutenant Governor Newsom, you are presiding over this meeting, and you must act responsibly to the people of California. You and the lands commissioners must immediately revoke the ill-granted permit that allows Rancho LPG Holdings LLC, a private corporation, to continue using the public land you oversee and putting at risk the lives of 500,000 Californians as well as the economy of most of Southern California. Rancho LPG stores 25 million gallons of very explosive and flammable propane and butane gases, and there's no way possible to make these tanks safe. These tanks can be penetrated easily by a power rifle, drone, or grenade launcher. Additionally, the Rancho tanks are only 150 feet from a rupture zone where a 7.3 magnitude earthquake is expected. And the tanks are built on sand in areas that are subject to liquefaction. Butane and propane gases burn at 3,200 degrees and cannot be controlled with water. These tanks are just a quarter mile from the port of Los Angeles. A blast of 25 million gallons of propane and butane will be equivalent to the blast of several atomic bombs. All the nearby petroleum tanks and pipelines above and underground will become part of a hellish firestorm that will kill tens of thousands and knock down flat the economy of the region. None of us have ever experienced a disaster of this magnitude, but words like Deepwater Horizon and Fukushima come to mind. I speak from some experience. I was serving as mayor of Richmond, California, when in August 2012, the local Chevron refinery exploded and burned for many hours, sending 15,000 people to local hospitals. 19 Chevron refinery workers barely escaped with their lives. Years before the fire, Chevron ignored safety demands from the people and city government of Richmond. They gave the same type of empty reassurances that the good people of San Pedro continue to receive from Rancho LPG. It's all fine and safe. Well, after the refinery explosion, Chevron pleaded no contest to criminal neglect, and last month it was mandated to initiate repairs for $25 million, mostly to replace corroded pipes they had refused to fix until now. It's all too clear that corporations put profits before people, and companies like Chevron and Rancho LPG gamble with the safety and well-being of the community. Furthermore, too often our regulatory agencies have allowed and enabled these companies to do this gambling at our expense. The fact that other agencies have acted irresponsibly and granted permits to Rancho and are allowing this disaster in the making does not relieve you, Lieutenant Governor Newsom, and members of the Commission of your responsibility to protect the lives of the people of California. Use the powers bestowed on you by the state of California to protect the people of California. California is not yet the 100% renewable energy state we must become, and for the time being, fossil fuel industries will continue to exist. However, both oil refineries and LPG storage facilities must be located in isolated areas of the state where they do not pose immediate dangers to residents. The tragedy of Richmond 2012 refinery fire pales in comparison to the colossal devastation that could easily occur in the San Pedro, Los Angeles area. So I'm here to say to the Commission that Californians are watching. They are expecting you to do much better than the other regulatory agencies who have failed them. Revoke the temporary permitted use of this state land for Rancho LPG. It will end the threat to thousands of lives and to the state's economy, and it will usher the relocation of the facility, eliminating into an isolated area, eliminating this risk that it presents to the entire Los Angeles harbor area. Be responsible. Revoke the permit. Approving the continuation of the permit, allowing the risk of these tanks to remain until disaster strikes, is equivalent to the dereliction of duty and criminal neglect, and you will be judged for it, and rightly so. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Gail. And please, I'd like to remind everyone, please, if you can't stick to the 3-minute time limit, we do have a lot of people that would like to speak. Up next, we have Jesse Marquez, followed by Flavio Mercado.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor Newsom, members of the State Lands Commission, as well as your State Lands Commission staff. We appreciate this opportunity to be able to present to you and discuss some of our concerns. I actually have 6 minutes assigned to me because Flavio has delegated his time for me in my presentation. I was born in San Pedro and raised all my life in Wilmington. I grew up with, 6 members of my family in a 1-bedroom house, so I know what poverty is and growing up poor is all about. I am the first in my generation of my family on both sides to be involved in the community and to be active in things and events as well as agencies and industries that have impacts on our community. I also come from another perspective. In Wilmington, I grew up on Alameda Boulevard, and when I was 16 years old, the Fletcher Oil Refinery that was located in the city of Carson blew up. Several of the jet fuel tanks blew up at that time. All 7 members of my family were burned from first to third degree burns. Over 200 people were burned or injured as a result of that. So I know the reality and how frightening something like that can be. My first slide. I'm going to be talking from a resident and environmental justice organization perspective about what we see as some of the public safety risks that may not necessarily always come up during the course of formal, assessments and things of that nature. Next slide. And naturally, as a nonprofit organization, we grant rights to everybody to use any of our photos and information. Next slide. This is a photo taken, you can see in 2016, of the walls buckling on a storage tank. I'm not a tank engineer or a structural engineer, but when I see something like that, it causes concern. Because why is it buckling? Is it because it's now 40, 50 years old? I don't know. But again, from an observation standpoint, as a member of the public, this is something that needs to be investigated. Now, is it going to be investigated? I saw in the staff report, page 6, it refers that the Los Angeles City Fire Department, CUPA, is going to, just conducted a investigation or a survey of this facility. Well, let me give you another public perspective. I have a no vote of confidence for the Los Angeles City Fire Department, CUPA. 2 years ago, they failed the CUPA examination of their little agency. They were written up for 17 violations. Last time I looked at that, of the status of that, which was a couple of months ago, 6, 7 of them still have not been resolved. Next slide. Here we see around the Rancho LPG facility is the ground and the berm that has an asphalt coating around it. But as you can see, it's deteriorating everywhere. Next slide. There's another evidence of the deteriorating ground around it. Next slide. What you see to the top right is a flare stack from ConocoPhillips oil refinery. Flare stacks always have a pilot on 24 hours in the bottom, but as you can see, there's a flame up on top, and it seems like this one flare, 4 or 5 days a week, always has a small flame. Well, what happens if there's an earthquake? That flare stack will fall down, and it will fall towards this tank. So again, there's a danger to igniting the ground, as well as any fumes, and if the tank was to crack open, again, it would burst into flames. Next slide. Here we see some of the tank cars, and the top lid is open. Again, from a member of the public, are they releasing fugitive emissions? Are they airing out the tank? I don't know. But it is a potential exposure to the environment of fugitive emissions that could ignite. Next slide. Here you see the curb. You see cars from the public parked right adjacent to this facility. Why are they there? Because across the street is Home Depot, and then we have a athletic field on the other side. Next slide. Here we show the athletic field where we have children, youth, our young girls practicing soccer, and there's the tanks less than 1,000 feet away from them. What chance do they have of surviving any major explosion? They have none. Next slide. Back a few years ago, ConocoPhillips was flaring. At the same time it was flaring, there was also fires happening. Again, we're only talking a half a mile away, all the way up to a few hundred feet from the Rancho facility. Next slide. Here you see some other storage tanks. So the fire could go to these tanks and cause them to explode. Next slide. Here we see the small tanks. Again, you can see the fire and the smoke in the background. Next slide. I went to Home Depot to buy something, and then there was a fire right here on Gaffey Street. To the right is where the rail track is. Next slide. You can see the fire trucks putting out the fire. Next slide. What you can't see real clear is the fact that the rail track is right there. So the fire has already gone on the other side of the rail track. Had there been cars there, then what could have been the catastrophic event from that? Next slide. Next slide. Other safety concerns: train derailment, land subsidence, located on earthquake line, airplane crashing on track, public vehicles hitting the train track or car, big rig truck hitting the train track or the cars. Next slide. We do have requests. Right here, we're talking about environmental justice concerns. I'll just skip that to get down to our specific request. Next slide. Next slide. We do want to have a new public safety risk assessment to be performed, where it takes into consideration all potential negative impacts and worst case scenarios of explosions, both natural as well as industrial as well as public. We need to have an emergency preparedness plan and community evacuation maps prepared for the residents and the schools that are near this facility. And remember, the railroad track goes all the way through Wilmington, which is in a residential area as well. We need the community and public schools to have emergency evacuation drills in the event there is an accident. Another simple thing that can be done is have a reinforcement protective wall made on the sidewalk to separate the railroad track from the public cars. Next slide. that the tanks need to be inspected so to make sure that the structural integrity is there. We see the buckling, we see them rusting. We do believe that there should be a mitigation fund, and we're recommending 5 cents per gallon to be charged to help offset. We ask that all permits be denied and the facility be shut down within 5 years, and that we do have a local newspaper called the Random Lengths News who features stories about the community. In this case, they have a major story on this facility. Thank you for your time.
Up next, Chuck Hart, followed by Connie Rudder.
We'll forget the niceties because it takes up too much time. The San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners United, I'm the current president of that organization. We appreciate this opportunity to again express our sincere concerns regarding the partnership between the Port of LA and Rancho LPG. The risk it represents cannot be eliminated. Rancho LPG should be removed from its current location. San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners United has been on a 43-year quest to eliminate the LPG storage site by exposing the true hazard it represents to our community, the port, our economy, the environment, and to the thousands of lives that could be impacted by a catastrophic event. We reject the inconsistent and scientifically flawed worst-case scenario models in Rancho's risk management plan. When Rancho challenged the realistic 3-mile LPG blast radius, we were disappointed that the EPA accepted those estimates of a 1/2-mile blast radius based on the claim that an impound basin would restrict impacts. We are frustrated by the fact that the previous agencies and political figures have refused to accept the challenge of doing what is right. Citing the same excuse, Rancho is in compliance with all regulations and there is nothing we can do. Decisions based on deception, faulty law, and or regulations that are intentionally designed to benefit industry of interest rather than the California public and its trust are essentially without any merit. Regarding the port, Rancho's business relationship, we request that you reconsider the decision to relinquish your power to an authority to protect and to serve our public trust lands to the Port of LA, an agency that has totally different missions and management interests. Remember, the port's deceptive tactics and true interests when revealed that they deceived the public by violating an environmental agreement set forth by the Chinese shipping settlement. You are in fact letting the fox into the chicken house. It is inappropriate for the port to jeopardize legitimate port business by partnering with a company such as Rancho LPG, which has no legitimate connection to the ocean commerce. Good risk management not only considers the design of an impound basin, but it attempts to minimize hazards potential and probability of occurrences of an incident. It stands to reason that the probability of an accident increases as frequency of a volatile materials transport increases. Therefore, failure to remove this rail and pipeline access to port lands, the people's lands, enables a dangerous and privately owned Canadian entity and not only exist, but to profit at the expense of the public. We petition the State of Lands Commission to consider the potential loss of the people of California that a Rancho incident would represent, whether by natural, accidental, or intentional causes. We, the people of California, are particularly those who neighbor the port, look to the State Lands Commission to exercise your sworn duty to protect and preserve our public trust property. If there is a basic flaw in our current political process, it has been that the common man's voice is but a whisper in comparison to the powerful legal voices of industry. It is agencies such as the State Lands Commission that we rely on to protect the public and its interests. You are the representatives and the voice of reason. For 43 years, the oil industry has been in control of our destiny and the very lives of our families. We would like to reinstate our plea. Please exercise the full extent of your authority to protect the public's interest from the hazardous operation of this wrongfully placed LPG facility. Thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration.
Connie Rudder, followed by John Papadakis.
My name's, Connie Rudder, and I worked in the oil industry and environmental compliance. And my part is going to be short, so relax. But I want to find fault with your staff report on page 6. You've done kind of a sloppy job. Whatever they told you, you put down here. But one of the things I want to explain is what somebody else pointed out about the half mile for these huge tanks versus the half mile for a 30,000 gallon rail car. And this is the fault of the American Petroleum Institute and the EPA, essentially colluding, the EPA caving into the API, American Petroleum Institute, who essentially said, you EPA gave instead of the original calculation that came out from the EPA was that each LPG facility was to assume that 10% of the volume took part in the flammable explosion. There are two explosions, first a vapor explosion and then a flammable explosion. So the API asked the EPA to, instead of assuming 10%, assume the first 10 minutes. And unfortunately, and that's what gives you the half mile. Assuming 10% gives you 3 miles, so that the original calculation should have been 3 miles. Then the EPA made it worse by saying LPG facilities could use the 10% figure, they could use the 10-minute figure, they could use a computer analysis, and so therefore, whatever the LPG facility submitted was not approved by the EPA, but just accepted. So they got a letter saying that they submitted something. So essentially the EPA shot down their own rule as far as effectiveness is concerned. I hope that that's clear.
Thank you. Is John Papadakis?
Hi, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I hope you can hear and see me. I'm impressed with the way you're handling the meeting and all the questions. Please consider this a cry for help. These tanks represent a pattern of civic abuse in San Pedro by the city and the port. My name is John Papadakis. My family has lived and worked in San Pedro for over 110 years. As chairman of the LA Harbor Watts Economic Development Corporation, I founded the Bridge to the Breakwater Grand Promenade plan for the Port of Los Angeles. It was adopted. An environmental plan to eradicate all the industrial uses and tanks on the West Channel, to effectively divide, as every port has, the commercial with the industrial, the commercial and residential with the industrial. A plan to recapture the waterfront for the true owners from the bridge to the breakwater, and establish public access Grand Promenade that is continuous on the waterline and built on a statewide scale. You know, Mr. Chairman, they say in some circles that Los Angeles is an enormous lake that is only 1 foot deep. And that's the truth, for we have no civic soul. San Pedro is the city's birthplace, yet today it is the only seaside slum in this state, truly in America. And incidentally, this slum is housed within the wealthiest port of the Western Hemisphere. I consider that a civic crime and punishment to the long-suffering citizens of southern Los Angeles. The LA Harbor area is the only statewide seaside, Mr. Chairman, where as one nears the waterline, the less the value of property, the less the quality of life, and the less the value of human life itself. That's what these tanks express. In all other California seasides, the sea brings abundant life. Here, the sea brings death. We have the worst air in the state and the highest cancer rate in the nation. In all other California seasides, the waterfront works for all. Here, it only works for the few. We lack the mandated diversity that has become the theme nationally. The anomaly of this California seaside poverty, crime, drug addiction, homelessness, and violence is due to the illegal and the monolithic use of our greatest resource, our waterfront. We are ruthlessly ruled by a port and city who maintain a very cruel political control to hide their environmental crimes. While they deny us public ownership and benefit of our waterfront, they deny us the primary public access to our water line, and they deny us the highest and best use of our water line. They keep San Pedro on its economic knees at the poverty level as a dirty and dangerous dead end to a corrupt city, a place they can control. The economic and environmental crippling of an entire region should be a statewide land use issue. Please, Mr. Chairman, make it a gubernatorial race issue, because please, state commissioners, make this an issue, for we lack the leadership to bring it forward. We are being crucified on the Iron Cross of the cargo industry here, and there's not a leader in LA who gives a damn about it. Thank you.
Anthony Patchett, followed by Carl Southwell.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Patchett, retired Assistant Head Deputy District Attorney, Los Angeles County Environmental Crime Social Division. The San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners United and the Tongva Ancestral Territorial Tribal Nations at today's California State Lands Commission hearing are requesting the Commission to follow the guidelines of the environmental justice policy that you have on your website. Number one, develop a plan for identifying when environmental justice communities may be adversely impacted by Commission decisions. Assure meaningful community representation in the Commission's decision-making process. Seek guidance from entities who have environmental justice expertise. Explore opportunities to promote environmental justice. Recognize the economic factors that may amplify the environmental effects of a proposed action. Provide outreach to environmental justice communities about the Commission, its jurisdictions, including the public trust doctrine and its guiding principle that trust lands belong to the public and are meant to be managed for the benefit of all people. Include environmental justice as a component to the Commission's environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act. Include terms in leases and approvals that provide for, protect, and enhance public access to sovereign lands and waterways. The State Lands Commission cannot substitute a CEQA analysis for a formal evaluation of whether public trust assets, in this case the rail and pipeline of Plains All American Rancho, are permissible uses under the public trust doctrine. Professor Robert B., the master of disaster, stated the only sensible way forward is to have an advanced, high-quality, thorough, validated risk analysis performed similar to advanced analysis that are done for critical facilities such as nuclear power plants. In this case, the use constitutes the use of public trust assets for the sole benefit of a private business interest that cannot exist without the use of the rail and underground pipeline traversing Tidelands Trust property. since the facility is not a port tenant and there is no longer any connection to direct waterborne commerce. Governor Brown, Lieutenant Governor Newsom, Attorney General Becerra, Mayor Garcetti, City Attorney Fuhrer, the City Council, the Port of Los Angeles, and the Board of Supervisors are all missing in action. Time is running out for the California State Lands Commission to implement their environmental justice policy before a disaster occurs. Thank you.
Carl Southwell, followed by Jamie Wilson. Is Carl here? Okay, we have next a representative for Deputy Supervisor Janice Hahn, Jamie Wilson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Newsom, Controller Yee, Commissioners, Commission staff. Thank you very much. My name is Jamie Wilson. I'm here representing Los Angeles County Supervisor Janice Hahn. Thank you for giving our community the opportunity to share their comments here at Ports of Call, right here in the main channel of the LA Harbor. The Rancho LPG facility is centered in the 4th Supervisorial District. It runs from Marina del Rey out to Diamond Bar. This facility is adjacent to homes, schools, parks, churches, the Los Angeles Harbor Port Complex. All of these are very, very valuable resources and very valuable assets. Just last Friday, the County of Los Angeles filed a petition for the California Supreme Court to stop new injections of natural gas in the Aliso Canyon storage facility near Porter Ranch until extensive new environmental and seismic safety studies can be completed. I'd like to read for a moment from a letter that then Congresswoman Hahn sent to the chairman of the Surface Transportation Board. Rancho LP, she sent this last October. Rancho LPG is located in San Pedro, stores liquefied petroleum gas. This dangerous facility is located near many pre-existing homes, shops, 6 youth soccer fields, and within a mere feet of an elementary school and a junior high school. Since I was in the city council as a councilwoman, I have supported closing this facility and having the fuel now being stored there moved to the respective refineries that generate the products. That's from that letter from October 20th. The State's Lands Commission occupies a critical role in our system. It acts as the people's trustee over the public trust lands to ensure the broader public interest is preserved and that environmental justice is respected. This facility stores up to 25 million gallons of butane in 2 12.5 million gallon tanks. Propane from this facility is regularly shipped by rail tanker car operated by the Pacific Harbor Line through the Port of Los Angeles and through the community. This presents a serious issue of public safety because a rail accident involving a tanker car which carries up to 33,000 gallons of propane would have a serious and potentially catastrophic impact on people's lives and property, the port, and the California economy. As I said earlier, the County of Los Angeles filed a petition with the California Supreme Court to stop new injections of natural gas in the Aliso Canyon field until extensive new environmental and seismic safety studies can be completed. We believe the same standard should be applied to Plains All-American Rancho LPG. We respectfully request that you place this item as an action item on your next agenda and require extensive new environmental, seismic, and risk analysis studies. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our concerns. Thank you.
Peter Burmeister, followed by Kaney Arnold.
Thank you, Commissioners. I have to be a homeowner in about a mile away. And I like to say I ditto everything what everybody said already. And my main concern is there's not just the railroad or the tanks. There's also trucks going through our community, tanker trucks loaded with butane and a natural gas. And that is also dangerous. There's so many people around that area. And on top of that, my main concern is the Los Angeles School District tried to build another charter school right next to it.
for 500 people, for 500 students. So that's a death sentence for our kids. So please consider that and help us. Thank you.
Kaney Arnold, followed by Tony Martinovich.
Hello, my name is Kaney Arnold, and I'm a retired federal civil servant. Worked for the Department of Defense for 32 years. 28 of those years were at Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center up in El Segundo. And I was a past candidate for City Council here for this district, and now I'm a candidate for State Assembly in the adjacent district, 66. And I just want to say, with my experience with the Air Force, I've seen a lot of these types of situations, obviously, where a company has come in and has a situation and the oversight is either there or it isn't there. And believe me, working for the Air Force, I saw a lot of situations where our oversight wasn't there, and even saw an Assistant Secretary of the Air Force thrown in jail for not doing proper oversight and for corruption. And I just want to mention, you have a room full of people here that are all worried about these tanks. And again, similar to my Air Force experience, I see a lot of people that can try to make something very simple sound very complicated and undoable. It's a very simple situation. It's a big, huge tank there that's refrigerated with a lot of flammable liquid, liquefied gas, and it can easily explode. I keep hearing this thing about, well, it's on private land, so we can't do anything. Well, that's obviously not true, because we can do something. In fact, I'll quote our city council member, Joe Buscaino, who equated this to a situation of loud music. He came to the wrong conclusion, but he had a good analogy. And he said, in that situation, what would a person do? Someone else's private property, there's loud music, and it's a nuisance. You call the police, and what do you expect? You expect the police will do something. This is the same exact situation. This is private property. Of course it is. It makes no difference. It's an ultra-hazardous use sitting next to people's homes, kids playing on soccer fields, businesses, near the port, the economic engine of the Southland and for the state of California. And all we hear is from our city councilman, well, you know, it is hazardous, but it costs a lot of money. The mayor admits, well, it is hazardous, but it costs a lot of money, so it should be the state. And the homeowners association went to the federal government and they said, well, you know, the port says it's not their responsibility, but, you know, it's not ours. It's not the federal government. It really is the ports. This is really a hot potato that no one really seems to want to take any responsibility for. You, as a lieutenant governor, possibly future governor, have responsibility over the entire state of California and can direct anything that you'd like. We'd like you to issue or have the Attorney General issue an injunction to halt the use of the tanks, either immediately or within 30 days. I'm sure all planes will respond. And that's another thing that everybody in the room would like to ask is, why is all planes allowed to respond last after everybody else has commented so that no one else here can respond to any of their comments? That seems extremely suspicious, and you have a room full of very angry people who are very suspicious of that also. And I'm sorry I went over, but sorry, I'm a little bit upset about this.
Tony Martinovich, followed by Peter Warren.
Hello, I'm Tony Martinovich, native San Pedro, and thank you very much for allowing us to speak today. I want to agree with the remarks of my fellow neighbors here and in San Diego. The tanks are too close to homes and schools. No one's mentioned that they're close to our police department as well, the people that we would be expecting to help us if there was an accident. And I think if you lived in our community, you'd be as concerned as we are. Please help us, and thank you again.
Peter Warren, followed by Bobby Lisk. Is Peter here? Bobby Lisk? Is Bobby here?
Good afternoon. My name is Bobby Lisk, and I've been a resident and business owner in San Pedro for 30 years. Now my shop is just a few steps away from this very restaurant. I am currently fighting an eviction by the Port of Los Angeles, who anticipates this Portugal Village site to be torn down, destroyed, and developed into a new attraction costing an estimated $100 to $200 million. While I have my own sense of the injustice of removing the village merchants so early in this development process, I have concerns that go much further. I cannot help but think of the irony of that massive investment in an effort to draw thousands of people to a location that continues to be threatened daily by the presence of highly explosive, deadly Plains Rancho LPG facility. Why would anyone knowingly and purposely ignore this extreme hazard and willfully not only invest this massive amount of money, but completely disregard the safety of innocent families drawn to this new attraction? This is not rocket science here. There are many hazardous sites at the port, and we all understand that. But this Rancho LPG facility is the most glaring of them all. This facility and its operation came into this community without a public process and many exemptions that should have never been granted. It was all at the hands of the Port of LA. I've read online about this commission and its responsibility to protect these public lands for the people. Well, we in San Pedro are the people, and it's extremely obvious that we are not being protected. We need you to intervene here for our public safety and for the protection of these lands for our future generations. Please step up to your obligation. Thank you for listening.
Robert West, followed by Stacy Dahlquist.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert West. I've been involved in this issue for 40 years. I originally bought a home closer to the tanks than I live now. However, years ago, the LA Times did a giant expose about the danger of this facility. And I was homeowners president at that time, and I got involved with Vincent Thomas, who is our assemblyman at that particular time, and also has a nice bridge over to Terminal Island named by him. I went up to the assembly, and my wife and I flew up there at the invitation of Vincent Thomas, and we spoke to the assembly about this issue. And by the time I got done, I was a very young man then, I learned, in my opinion, who runs the government, and the lobbyists came out of the woodwork like flies coming to, I won't say what, but anyway, it'd be nice. But anyway, I learned a big lesson about how government operates. And I'm sorry to say this, but they let us down. By the time I got done, it was Vincent Thomas was able to get OSHA to do something about it a bit, and so forth. But I still live in the area. I'm very concerned about it. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I know an awful lot about it. I know what Connie Rudder said is true. I know about earthquakes. I have a degree in geography. I know that there's a Palos Verdes fault that runs just north of this facility that has the potential to a fault, if you want to call it that. And why the city of Los Angeles, the port, or any official, including the fire department, which sometimes I have little respect for some of the ones at the higher level that I heard make comments saying that there was no big deal. But the point is, if I do sound a little angry, I am, because I think it's criminal that this company is still in existence after all these years there, and their tanks are old. The area is filled full of children and homes, schools. In fact, there's a giant home tract being built just north of it, and why it exists, in my opinion, is just criminal. But thank you for your consideration. Maybe you're our last hope. Thank you very much.
Stacy Dahlquist, followed by Gwendolyn Henry.
Good afternoon. My name is Stacy Dahlquist. I've been a resident here in San Pedro for 25 years, and I am a high school teacher at Long Beach Jordan High School, which is in a pretty rough area. And I get asked all the time if I'm afraid to go to school or to go to my job or whatever, and I'm thinking, you know, what I face every day is nothing compared to what the schools around the LPG facility face every day. I've known about this very hazardous facility for a few years now and have been extremely concerned for the welfare of my friends, family, and particularly for the local schools that fall well into the 3-mile blast zone associated with these massive tanks. I heard about the rail car accident from the Rancho facility that occurred directly upon the rail at Westmont Drive. And this was in the afternoon, just as the Taper Elementary School was releasing their young students. There was no notice to any schools, residents, or shops of this accident, which could have been catastrophic. I do know that there are 2 schools that fall within the 1,000 to 1,300 feet of Rancho LPG and a preschool directly across the street. There are another 2 private high schools that fall within 1 mile. And one of those is Mary Star High School. I have family that works there. I have very good friends that work there, you know, let alone the Norbertine priests that work there and live there. We have Dodson Junior High and Christ Lutheran Grade School, perhaps within about 2 miles. My point here is that they are incredibly close and easily fall within the 3-mile blast radius of a single one of the 2 large 12.5 million gallon butane tanks. I know that this facility was brought in over 40 years ago, and lots of public officials have stated that it should never have happened, but that is no excuse for allowing it to continue to endanger people today. The risks today are much greater, and someone needs to show the leadership and backbone to address it today. Chairman Newsom, please show your leadership on this issue to right a serious wrong, because our time is running out fast. Thank you.
Gwendolyn Henry, followed by Brian Vassallo.
Hello, Lieutenant Governor Newsom and Commissioners. My name is Gwendolyn Henry, and I live in San Pedro. And thank you for being patient with us. Many of us have a lot to say about it, about the Rancho LPG. I wanted to speak on more of a global aspect of it, or a national aspect of it. In 2006, Congress passed the Safe Port Act to help ensure that maritime transportation infrastructure was effectively secured from the threat of terrorism. In 2016, the RAND Corporation had looked back at the studies and the analyses that were done at that time, and came to the determination that they had definitely secured the ports in regards to maritime risk. Well, they didn't. I've seen all the reports, and most of them are talking about threats from the ocean, threats from the sea, you know, very elaborate plans, you know, somebody with a dirty bomb or a nuclear thing and smuggling it in and that kind of thing. But most of them do not actually analyze tactical things that surround the port. And one of the things that is the biggest bomb you could possibly have is this facility. Now, back in 2006, the Council on Foreign Relations actually did have a conversation about this. They say that they were very concerned that experts warned that U.S. seaports could be tempting targets for terrorists bent on killing large numbers of people, grabbing media attention, and disrupting the U.S. economy. The Port of Los Angeles. Port ferry and cruise ship terminals are often located in highly congested areas where large numbers of people live and work. Liquefied natural gas terminals and refineries that produce highly volatile petrochemicals and convert crude oil into gasoline and heating oil are often nearby. That is here. Now, Jesse Marquez spoke of emergency preparedness and the need for it. Well, we don't have it here. And if you look at Janet Gunter's map, you'll see that not only are neighborhoods here, and the Port of Los Angeles is just within the blast radius. That's the economic engine of the Western United States. Your auntie in Kansas got tennis shoes from here. Anyway, if you look at the map, there's also the 110 freeway. The 110 freeway is the major access out of here. So is, what's it called now? Harry Bridges. You know, that's trucks, that's everything. That's all the transportation out. Western is also the access out, and that is within probably the blast radius, or would be so inundated by people trying to exit, nobody would leave. Anyway, thank you. Please look at it on a national scale, and that your responsibilities, if there was an event like that, even your name would be listed as minor and as tangible as your responsibility in this. It would be listed in those responsible. Thank you.
Brian Vasallo, followed by Pat Nave.
Good afternoon. Brian Vasallo with the Los Angeles Waterfront Access and Redevelopment Coalition. Common sense is not so common. It was Voltaire who originally said that, although today we like to attribute the quote to Mark Twain. For a Southern boy like me, Mark Twain perhaps said it a little more eloquently when he said, "I found that common sense ain't all that common." Isn't common sense what we are all here for today? Like Voltaire in the 1700s, we are here today fighting for our civil liberties, as well as our constitutional right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In this case, more so than anything else, in the harbor area of Los Angeles, residents are literally fighting for their lives. We are here today to discuss a bipartisan issue, one which has Republicans, Democrats, and independents united, and involves the temporary permitted use of state land for the rail lines running to and from the Rancho LPG facility in our town. A facility built over 40 years ago during a time when then President Richard Nixon, speaking about the national energy crisis of 1974, asked his fellow Americans to accept some sacrifices in comfort and conveniences so that no American would have to suffer real hardship. In that same address, President Nixon also told Americans that private profiteering at the expense of public sacrifice must never be tolerated in a free country. I'm not here today because I dislike private profiteering. I'm a capitalist. I am, however, against it at the expense of public sacrifice, and that's what's happening right here in the harbor area. None of us can deny that there are legitimate safety concerns surrounding this facility. 25 million gallons of explosive inflammable propane and butane gases sitting openly exposed to the residents of this area and America's port, atop an earthquake rupture zone capable of a 7.3 magnitude or greater earthquake, in a high liquefaction soil area, all with no assurances that these tanks were built to last. Common sense should tell us that all of this is a recipe for disaster. Now, if you went to Sunday school like I did growing up as a kid, you're probably familiar with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. I think we can all agree that those are good words to live by. Like the Voltaire quote, though, we sometimes take the liberties and change things. Today, it seems like the golden rule goes more like he who has the gold makes the rules. And that's unfortunate. especially in this case. California State Land Commission, I am humbly requesting 3 things from you today concerning the Rancho LPG facility. Please employ common sense. Please consider the original golden rule and ask Rancho LPG to do the same. And finally, revoke the temporary permitted use of our state land for the use of the Rancho LPG facility. If you truly deem this facility to be safe, and you can disagree with the LA School Board, countless experts, and the voters who are here today, and you can conscientiously say there's no risk of public sacrifice, then go through the proper process and give them a permanent permit for usage of this land. Thank you for your time.
Pat Nave, followed by Aaron M.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Nave. I am a resident of San Pedro. From 1974 to 2004, I was an assistant city attorney with the City of Los Angeles, assigned to the Los Angeles Harbor Department. I have a specific suggestion to make that I think will address many of the safety concerns regarding rail transportation of hazardous materials in the port area, that it's entirely compliant with the Surface Transportation Board limitations and with the case of Arco versus Dixie Lee Ray, the governor of the state of Washington, where the state of Washington sought to require double bottom of ships, additional tugs, and other safety matters for transportation of North Slope crude into Puget Sound. What can be done? Well, right now the port has to do safety analyses, risk management analyses, and a risk management plan in order to have the ability to issue its own coastal permits for marine oil terminals. But the port takes a position that that does not apply to the transportation of those hazardous materials in and out of those terminals by rail or by pipeline or by truck. Why is that important? Well, I've been around long enough to remember when the Gatex plant on 22nd and Minor Street blew up during the transfer of product. By the way, the port still can't use that land. It's fenced off because it's so contaminated. And that was 40 years ago or more. I can remember the Sansanina that blew up during the transfer of product. I know of 2 chlorine transfer accidents at the Hooker Chemical transfer rack on Mormon Island, where they had to evacuate the Todd Shipyard's plant. Now when I drive by the rail tracks along Gibson Boulevard, sometimes I see the rail cars, the rail tank cars. They're maybe 200 meters from the police station on Gibson Boulevard. I go on around and I can see the tank cars lined up on the tracks across from residential homes in Wilmington. I recall the conversation I had over at where Fireboat 1 is located, the big boat, years and years ago with the captain, and I said, you know, what concerns you? Is it tankers in the harbor? And he said, no, what scares the hell out of me is those rail tank cars that are parked across the street over there in the rail, where the rail lines are in ports of call, because we don't know what's in them. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you guys get together with State Lands Commission and change the regulation that allows the port to have its authority for the marine oil terminals expanded to include the transport of the goods in and out of those marine oil terminals by pipeline, by rail tank car, and by truck tank car. And Jennifer Lucchese, I can't tell you how delighted I am every time I see you as the executive director, because I remember when you were an intern in law school. If you want some greater explanation on this and have by a staff member, my phone number is in the phone book and I'll take your calls. Thank you.
Aaron M., followed by Kathleen Woodfield.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron McCroskey. My wife and our 2 young sons, who are standing next to me here, live within 2.5 miles as the crow flies from the Plains-operated Rancho LPG facility. We only became aware of our jeopardy in the past year or so, and it has alarmed us greatly. The single largest investment most Americans make is in their home, and that is the case with us as well. We live in the city of Lomita, And until a year or more ago, we felt very comfortable and secure in our environment. But now we know that we should not be comfortable. There are numerous hazardous sites in the Port of Los Angeles, and we realize that the opportunity of an earthquake, accident, or terrorism is possible. But what we have learned about this particular Rancho LPG site is shocking. It seems not only that it was exempted from numerous regulations at the time it was installed in 1973 under heavy political influence, but there has been a long line of politicians who have consistently covered for the high risk that it presents until today. These public officials and agencies are completely disregarding public safety. In fact, even though the LA mayor and the city councilmen who represent this district have openly acknowledged the unbelievable risk from the Rancho LPG site, they just approved another 600 or more homes to be built right next to it, and its rail line. This is after stating, I quote, "We know that this facility represents a major risk, but there is nothing we can do about it." So what do? They invite another 2,000 people to the incineration zone. What is going on here? And this is wrong. This is state lands, public agency, has the duty to protect this area. Chairman Newsom, you are running for governor. You can't sit by and say that there's nothing you can do to prevent what you know could easily become the dissemination of the Port of Los Angeles, which represents the economic engine of the state of California. If you care about the lives of us who live there, you should do something. And if you don't, you should at least care about the $200 billion industry that these ports represent to the state. Please, don't sit there and tell us you can't do anything. It insults our intelligence. Please do something. Thank you.
Kathleen Woodfield, followed by John Lang.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Kathleen Woodfield. I'm the Vice President of San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners Coalition. This is a real deja vu for me. I have been before you many times on this issue of the Rancho storage tank facility. My son was in middle school, I think, last time I spoke before you, and now he's in college. And so, but nothing has changed except that the facility has gotten older and more antiquated. I truly don't understand the rationale for your inaction. We often feel we have a sympathetic ear when we speak before you, but then nothing happens. And I just want to say, as an aside from what I've written here, that I too am offended that the port staff and the Rancho staff get to speak last. They always, always, always get the upper hand under all circumstances. I'd also like to point out to you, if you didn't notice, that the Rancho facility is able to put us all at so much risk for only $1,400 a month to the state, to the port. The port has demonstrated its mismanagement. There are many examples. One is China Shipping, which resulted in a lawsuit which the community brought against the port. The port then failed to execute the mitigation that was required by the China Shipping court-ordered EIR resulting from that lawsuit. And it hid this failure from the community, an egregious act. That alone should be enough mismanagement to cause you to assert your authority and intervene. But then there is this Rancho facility. It needs an appropriate EIR for its current operation model, yet it doesn't have one. Still, it uses Port of Los Angeles assets, state assets of both rail and pipeline to support its operation. We believe that the state needs to assert its authority and advise the port that its demonstrated mismanagement of the risks associated with the Rancho facility and its demonstrated disinterest in the risks associated with Rancho's rail use and pipeline use that moves through the port property and uses port assets, puts you, state lands, in the position of requiring an environmental assessment of these risks. This would not be micromanaging. Ranchos should be required to carry insurance capable of covering these risks and all of its operational risks, but really, ultimately, this facility needs to be removed. At the very least, we ask that the Rancho facility not be allowed to use the rail or pipelines or any other assets associated with the Port of Los Angeles until these risks are analyzed. Thank you very much.
John Lang, followed by Peter Rosenwald. John here. Peter Rosenwald. Is Peter here? Peter was the last speaker here in San Pedro.
Great. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time.
That'll be it.
There's been a request on this side of the state to take a brief break, particularly for a few folks that are responsible for keeping the lights on. So I'm going to be respectful of that and indulge us, if you could, for just a few moments, and we'll come back and continue our conversation. All right, everybody, we're back on. Thank you, everybody, very much for your patience. We still have a few speakers, and in the spirit of reconciliation of sorts, or at least recognition, I want to relieve the anxiety of those two public speakers that rightfully, I thought, questioned any sinister motives of this commission to suggest that we had somehow stacked the deck in terms of our order of public comment. And as a consequence, I want to mix it around a bit so we can absolve any of those sentiments and make sure the record reflects that there was no such thing and that we indeed had no particular order in mind. And so I would ask in that spirit that Jack Hedge at the Port of Los Angeles, if you wish to say a few words, the mic is yours, and then Ron Conroy of Rancho LPG. And then I believe there are still, and this is the point, a number of other public speakers at San Pedro that wish to speak, and we'll give you in San Pedro the last word. I am not Lawrence O'Donnell, but I am the current chair of State Lands, Gavin Newsom. Thank you. Sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the Commission. I am Deputy City Attorney Justin Howderman from the City Attorney's Office of Los Angeles. We primarily were here and invited here to answer questions, so that's why we're waiting to the end, but we're happy to answer questions now. I have with me Jack Hedge, he is Director of Industrial Real Estate down at the Port, and Mr. Michael Keenan, who is the Director of Planning at the Port of Los Angeles.
Good. All right. Well, with that in mind, maybe we will ask at you. Why don't you, thank you, fabulous comments. You've given us context of your presence, and we'll take advantage of that once we do close public comment.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. Is the same true for the representative from LPG, or do you wish to speak now? Ron, are you here?
Yes.
Would you like to speak now, or would you if you wish to speak, the mic is yours. Grateful.
My name is Ron Conroe. I'm the Western District Manager for Plains LPG. I represent the Rancho LPG facility in San Pedro. Again, thank the commissioners for your patience and everything. I know this is a long, drawn-out process, but it always is. First of all, I want to say that I kind of figured about what was going to be said up here and by the folks in San Pedro. They continue to say things that they can't validate. They don't have any documents to back them up. They'll pull out some newspaper article or something of that nature. I don't speak from that perspective. I will deal only with the regulations, the laws, as they stand today. I'm not going to answer every allegation, but I'll be open to any questions that you may want to ask. With regards to what the request from County Supervisor Janice Hahn, I'll have those seismic reports in her email tomorrow when I get back to the office. We have them for the city, state, and federal, and seismic is a mandated requirement under CalARP, under the state of California, and it's mandated every 5 years, and it's up to the newest standards of the current building codes and the ASME codes, the American Society of Civil Engineers. So the codes, nobody's grandfathered into that. Our seismic and our CalARP has been audited by the CUPA, our 2014. It is compliant. They just finished an audit here recently, last month. So with that in mind, with regards to a lot of the claims here, it seems like I just keep hearing over and over about some 3-mile blast radius. I want to refer back to the notes from the State Lands Commission meeting, June 19th, 2014, page 32, and it was referring to a letter, a legal-to-legal letter from EPA Region 9 Attorney Andrew Helmlinger to Plains third-party attorney Cliff McFarland. And I quote, this is EPA Attorney Helmlinger speaking, "I can confirm that the EPA has calculated the consequence radius from the main Rancho tanks at the LPG facility to 0.5 miles based on EPA's regulatory formula. It would be factually accurate for Rancho to make a statement that EPA has, not just looked at ours, but has calculated the consequence radius consistent with the regulations to be 0.5 miles and not 3 miles as Ms. Gunter asserts," unquote. So I see in the notes here from to this meeting today that the SPPU and the activists requested the EPA do the same in 2016. We got the same results. And the EPA also made a statement in there about our butane facility is one of the safest butane facilities simply because that we refrigerate the butane. So people in Lomita or wherever else that got up in Long Beach, and then the former mayor from Richmond, get up and make these claims, they're not validated by the applicable regulation and by the regulatory agency that the United States Congress gave oversight for in 1990. So, we can come up here and say whatever we wish, I guess, because it's a free country and I believe in free speech. I serve my country for that purpose. But, you have to have something to validate it and something behind a statement you make, and we do. With regards to compliance, basically in our business, compliance is defined as certification or confirmation that a doer of an action or the manufacturer or supplier of a product meets the requirements of accepted practice, legislation, prescribed rules, regulations, and specific standards. That's what we do, right? If we don't meet those, we expect to get called on the carpet. Since 2010, the Rancho LPG facility has been inspected and audited approximately 71 times by city, state, and federal regulatory agencies with outstanding results. Rancho is pleased to report, as of today, no state, federal, city regulatory agency or legal authority can say that Rancho facility is out of compliance or in violation with any laws. If they can produce a document, I'll relinquish the microphone. Furthermore, In 2012, the following lawmakers have conducted public forums to address the community concerns about the Rancho facility. Councilman Joe Buscaino in June 2012, Congressman Henry Waxman, September 2014, State Senator Isidore Hall in 2016. Also, the Port of Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners ruled in Rancho's favor on this rail spur issue back in 2012. And additionally, Rancho has been before an agendized State Lands Commission 3 times, 2014, once in 2016, and well, here we are again today. Hopefully this may be the last. Despite the numerous inspections, audits, and public forums and FOIA requests resulting in no findings that Rancho is either out of compliance, unlawful, or unsafe, the SPPHU activists continue to say they're frustrated. I heard that word again today, that nobody's listening to their voices. Well, from my perspective and what I've seen over the course of this long debate over 9 years, it's clearly the SPPHU that's not listening because the facts don't match their rhetoric, and they don't want to hear that. Therefore, one must question, is this just frustration or something else? I want to draw to your attention, in May 2012, the SPPHU produced an inaccurate and highly inflammatory video showing the Rancho facility and key equipment in the crosshairs of a sniper rifle from various community vantage points in which to wreak the most havoc on the facility. This video was shown indiscriminately throughout the facility. Flyers were sent out, and these are some of the photos from that. Now, I don't know, that may be frustration. I think it's something else. During the aforementioned public meeting held by Congressman Waxman in September 2014, the day before, the Department of Homeland Security, including DHS Director Dave Wolf, inspected the Rancho facility and validated our site security plan. The next day, during Congressman Waxman's meeting, they had seen the video the day before. We showed it to them. They were appalled. They asked the residents not to do those kinds of things. It wasn't prudent. Again, it's not that they can't, it's a free country. It wasn't prudent to do those kinds of things. Particularly given in 2012, as we all know, there was a number of copycat killings resulting in 88 deaths across the United States, including Aurora, Colorado, and Newtown, Connecticut. At the meeting of Henry Waxman's, Congressman Waxman, there were also signs mentioned. There were a lot of people that were wearing signs and stuff touting ISIS plus Rancho equals death. Right? Now, again, frustration's one thing, this is something else. However, in March 2016, SPPHU members produced another inaccurate inflammatory video against Rancho. You saw that this afternoon. We rebuffed that on our third-party expert to Professor B, and he could not explain how he come up with those things, and he would not validate anything that any of these commenters said, including Ms. Gunter. So, you know, when you look in there, the video, you could see when Ms. Gunter was speaking at 15 seconds, you saw a sign ISO plus Ranchos equals death. As a result, the union that supplies and represents our workforce sent letters of protest to both Congressman Waxman and Congressmember Hahn at the time, protesting those kind of actions. I think that's something else. That's not frustration. You can label it as you wish. I don't label it as frustration. In closing, if you could put number 2 up on the screen, we'll skip number 1. The greater Los Angeles harbor area is a hub, has lots of refineries, lots of hazardous facilities in the area. We all know that. We don't marginalize the dangers whatsoever. But to overstate the danger and to imply things like 50 atomic bombs, that's impossible. That's physically impossible. I asked Professor B to tell us how that can happen with that butane, those butane tanks. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it because it's physically impossible. I can tell you the equation to make it possible, but it's physically impossible. The problem is that Rancho is doing no more than a lot of the other facilities there. We're not the only facility in the area that has LPG on site, and not the only one that stores LPG in refrigerated tanks and pressure tanks, and not the only facility that transports LPG via rail from the port to and from the port to the facilities. We're not the only one that does that. And we do it in less quantities than the others. During the said public meeting held by Senator Hall in March 2016, at approximately 1 hour and 17 minutes of the State Senate archive video, Mr. Chuck Hart, president of the SPPPHU, clearly testifies that a neighboring facility adjacent to Rancho has 4 LPG tanks, and their worst case blast radius is 2.3 miles. Now wait a minute. Even if ours was 3, theirs is 2.3. It's like there's a double standard here. By contrast, we have we're responsible to produce one worst case scenario in our risk management plan because we only have one process. Refineries, I've seen as many as 26 worst case in their RMPs because they have a multiple process. I can say that because I've got a lot of years experience in the refining industry as well. Back in 2015, there was a pretty bad explosion at the ExxonMobil Torrance refinery. Chaired by Senator Ben Hueso, there was an oversight committee. I challenge you to look at the archive video of the hearing that shows Ms. Gunter at about 2 hours and 54 minutes say the following, and I quote, "When the explosion first happened, I was actually joyful for a moment, only because, well, until I made sure nobody was hurt," unquote, and then continued her diatribe against Rancho at a meeting that was specifically for those people in Torrance. In 2012, Councilman Joe Buscaino put forth a measure before the LA Public City Committee and Safety Council to have all the hazardous facilities, including Rancho, that they would have oversight, and that oversight, and particularly the CalARP inspections, would be, and the results of those inspections would be put online in a database through the Los Angeles Fire Department, CUPA. That is being done. You can look at that. You can see who's in compliance and who isn't, right? I think that was a good idea, right? Most people thought it was a good idea. However, in response in 2012 to Councilman Buscaino, Janet Gunter writes a letter dated October 2nd, 2012, and item number 8 on that, she's urging the councilman to do, and I quote, "Limit your focus to just Rancho instead of purposely trying to confuse, complicate the discussion by including other facilities. This latter will only delay, deflect, and obfuscate the real issue, which is Rancho." And I can also, in that same video, at 2:53 of that same video, Mr. Weiss, I won't leave him out, he talks about and tells the committee that butane's not covered by any law. It's exempt. That's not true. It's covered by EPA 40 CFR 68.130, tables 1 through 4. And also he mentioned the tanks. Well, the state fire marshal, he has jurisdiction over those tanks. Bottom line is these inexplicable actions like the videos and all of this kind of stuff and putting that stuff out in the public domain that's inaccurate and inflammatory is really not a crusade about the dangers associated with LPG or public safety. However, it's an attempt by a few misguided people to single out a small, compliant, and lawful facility such as Rancho LPG for their own self-serving interest. When it comes to public safety, clearly, the SPPHU, they're not sincere, but they are selective about public safety and the dangers of LPG. That being said, I want to thank you for your time. I don't want to take up any more. I will be available for any questions that you would like to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And back to San Pedro, any other public comment? Anybody else fill out? I think we may have a few more. Thanks, man. Oh, wow. You had to go over. Oh, sorry. Sorry, sir. If there you go. Yeah. If you hold on one second, sir. Sorry to interrupt. Just want to make sure we can hear you on the other side.
Janet Schaff Gunther, members of the Holy Trinity Church in San Pedro, their Peace and Justice Committee. Our goal is to attempt to bring light and attention to the dangerous situation posed to the neighborhood and environs around Rancho LPG Holdings, LLC, located at 2110 North Gavin Street. An individual stockholder, the Target store is located about 4 blocks down from Rancho.
Sir, I think the San Diego location would
Yeah,
like
just
you to
one
start.
sec. We'll get it
I
fixed.
don't think that they can hear you. Do we? I think we're having an issue. It's okay. Hold on one moment while we try to fix it. Just get a little rest.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give it to him. Oh, thank you.
How's that go? Let's see.
Thank you.
Say anything. Let's see if we can hear you.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
There you go, sir. I think we're ready for you. Apologize for that.
Give me the wire.
Please begin.
No.
You guys hear us?
No.
Anybody on the other side hear us? Wave your
I'm
arms.
sorry, Gavin. Try this. Go. Talk to him.
Is that right? Can you hear us now? How's that sound? If you can hear us, we can hear you, which means you can start.
$260,000. Oh, there you go. Okay. Because we have a okay.
I think we can hear you fine.
Is that what you want to do? That's part of my presentation.
Oh, okay.
If you guys can hear us, we're ready to go.
We'll testing. Try this one more time.
Perfect, we can hear
Our
you.
last speaker is Peter Rosenwald.
Thank you, Peter.
Honorable Chair and members of the Commission, assembled citizens, industry representatives, please let me introduce myself. I'm Peter Joseph Rosenwald, and I'm a member of the South Coast Interfaith Council Justice and Peace Committee, based in Long Beach. Over 2 years ago, we teamed up with Connie Rudder and Janet Schaff Gunther, members of the Holy Trinity Church in San Pedro Peace and Justice Committee. Our goal was to attempt to bring light and attention to the dangerous situation posed to the neighborhood and environs around Rancho LPG Holdings, LLC, located at 2110 North Gavin Street in San Pedro. I'm an individual stockholder in the Target Corporation. This is of significance because Target has a store at 1701 North Gavin Street, just about 4 blocks away from Rancho. I personally attempted to notify Target of the fact that its store could be endangered by a devastating accident at the Rancho facility. I made my statements at the January 8, 2016 annual stockholder meeting in Costa Mesa. Also, there is a resolution from the Los Angeles Unified School District dated January 12, 2016, which requested a relocation of the facility. It was unanimously passed as a consent vote. I'm concerned about the safety afforded the public, including the Target store, and schools, just in general to citizens, because of the dangers inherent in the operation and storage and movement of this liquefied petroleum gas by the company. The facility, Rancho, the company, has a website, www.rancholpg.com, which has different sections to it. There is a question and answer section, and one of the questions that is asked and answered is, what do other agencies think of Rancho? And what the answer is, in 2011, 14 audits of the facility were conducted, including a surprise multi-agency audit in May of 2011. Rancho has consistently shown, this is a quote, shown to be in compliance with its safety record. How can this be? On July 24th, 2014, a story in the Los Angeles Times by Dan Weichel, a reporter, titled "San Pedro Butane Storage Company Agrees to Pay $265,000 Fine to the Environmental EPA." How can this be that they claim that they've always been in compliance? Their public statement is much different from this is one example. Also at the top of their questions and answer section, Rancho is committed to maintaining safe operations. We meet regularly with elected officials, regulatory agencies, and neighborhood and community leaders to share information about the facility and help provide accurate information on our operations. Well, I went to the Target store in 2016, spoke with the team leader of the store, and Janet Gunter had gone to both Target and Home Depot in 2014. They never heard anything. They didn't really even know that the management, the local management of the stores didn't really know that there was any problem or any situation like this existed.
Please conclude, sir.
I shall. Here are some of Rancho's problems, including but not limited to: located in an earthquake rift zone, fault rupture area, in an area subject to ground movement liquefaction, in a dangerous condition of a mix of butane rail transport tankers crossing a major drayage and materials handling business on Westmont and North Daffy Street. A picture of a butane tanker colliding with a semi-truck was shown earlier in a presentation by someone else. Being subject in its origin and operations to the influence of political favoritism. That was also mentioned, and that's much harder to prove. Thank you for your attention to this and the opportunity for me to speak about the problems, the veracity of Rancho LPG Holdings, LLP.
Thank you.
Right. So, anybody here, just final call on public comment? See none, will close public comment on this information item. Thank you all very much for your patience. Thank you all for your perspective and insight. I know there are a lot of questions from the commission, and I'm grateful that we have our staff assembled, prepared to answer as many as they possibly can. But I know in particular, Commissioner Yee, you have very strong opinions, and I'm very grateful for your leadership on this and your willingness to bring this back to the commission and engage in this public dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the speakers who spent time coming before the commission today here and in San Pedro. A couple thoughts. One is, And thank you Mr. Chairman, for agreeing to agendize this item. We've had a lot of conversations, I think, each on our own with different members of the community. But really, as a commission, I thought it was important for us to hear these concerns collectively as commissioners, but also to better understand some of the jurisdictional issues, because I find this whole matter pretty appalling. That it has gone on for so long where community concerns have not been addressed. I can't even begin to tell you how to go about validating some of these concerns. There seems to be some disagreements among the parties about whether how serious these concerns are. But to me, this is not going to add any comfort to the conversation, but I think it might point us in some directions where we might be able to get some answers. First, squarely, this commission does not have jurisdiction over the facility, and certainly the property on which the facility is located. That is fact, and it is on property that was acquired by the port itself. But having said that, it is of concern to us, obviously, the potential safety risks that the community is experiencing or could experience. And so I guess my question first is back to the port officials who are here. Obviously, the Surface Transportation Board has asserted exclusive authority over the rail spur that's in question here. However, the police powers are still retained locally by the local agency. I guess I'm trying to just get a handle on how the city and how the port continues to look at that authority of exercising its police powers over public health and safety. Because that to me is kind of the crux of the issue. And I'm a little startled that, and would like to know kind of the process that was pursued in terms of the decision to cite additional housing development in the area. So, I mean, all those questions to me kind of point to maybe some more diligence locally, but more importantly, diligence that's done in a very public way and in a very transparent way, and also in a way that involves the affected communities. So I don't know if that answers any of the concerns particularly straight on, but I do have to say that first and foremost, this particular facility, although it's not within the commission's jurisdiction, I mean, I certainly as one commissioner do feel like we can't just turn our back to what's happening with respect to the communities that are affected by the facility here. But I think the first thing I would really like to see is some process for how we can get the community and the port and the and Rancho together on the same page with respect to what's really going on. And I know you've been waiting for decades for that to happen, but frankly, I think there's been enough outcry, and I would hope that our local officials with the city as well as with the port would really take this a little bit more seriously with respect to coming together and really having some serious dialogue with members of the community. You know, safety issues, perceived or real, become really not the best thing to really predicate decisions upon until we really get a handle on what's going on. And you know, I'm in the business of transparency as controller, and I really would like to see more of that happen locally.
Appreciate that. Just a gentleman, Ms. Lucchese. So there were a number of, Ms. Gunder and others specifically laid out some of their asks of this body in terms of requests in the Attorney General's office, and specifically opening up quote-unquote agreements and some other specific examples that were presented not only in slide form but in testimony. The issue of jurisdiction, you know, is obviously is a profoundly significant point, though let's be honest, we lean into a lot of things. And you know, that's why we're an activist commission of sorts. That said, what is your assessment of what legitimately we can do? You expressed concerns, as we all have, around this issue. And I know you've given it a great deal of thought, and you had a chance to listen to testimony, and where do you think we should go next with this?
Right. Well, first, I just want to say that the risks are real and the concerns are real and sincere. And I want to express that from a staff's perspective, we understand that, and we feel that in our communications with the communities. That doesn't always come across and is reflected in our staff reports, because we do have to take, when we draft those staff reports, to provide information to the commissioners and to the public, and a lot of times that takes a bureaucratic and format. So the fact that staff isn't able to reflect that we really hear the community here and understand that their concerns are real and sincere, I know doesn't come across as well in our written form. So I just wanted to emphasize that. What I'm about to say about jurisdiction is not a popular subject, but that's the space that commission staff lives in when we look at issues that are brought to us, is as an agency, as an institution that was created by the state legislature, what authorities did the state legislature give to the commission in managing the state's lands and resources, and in this particular case, overseeing legislative grants to local municipalities. As many people know, there's over 80 grants of tide and submerged lands to various local municipalities throughout the state. Those grants differ greatly among the local jurisdictions. The grants that involve the legislature granting lands and the resources to our major ports in California, including Long Beach and Los Angeles and Oakland, those grants were made in the early 1900s and have been amended a number of times, but essentially the legislature granted these lands and the resources in full fee to the ports. To manage on behalf of the commission, or excuse me, on behalf of the state, and did not reserve a whole lot of authority back to the State Lands Commission in making those grants. In this particular instance, there are some bits and pieces of the overall facility transportation element that weave in and out of the port, and that revolves around the rail lines, as well as some of the pipelines. We have looked very deeply into what the State Lands Commission's direct jurisdiction is as it relates to those facilities. In the context of the legislative grant, in the context of what the legislature has, what powers the legislature has given the commission. It's extremely limited. The commission does not have the authority to overturn or terminate a lease or a permit or an agreement that the Port of Los Angeles has entered into. The commission does not have an appeal power similar to other regulatory agencies, where the commission can come in and review a decision by the port and somehow negate it or overrule it. We have looked into the various permits that the port has issued to both Rancho and the Pacific Harbor Line. We've also looked into the various pipelines that service this facility that cross over the port's property. We are not seeing violations of the statutory trust grant that from these permits. There has been some questions about whether there's lands that the port owns that the rail line utilizes that the port actually doesn't lease or permit in any way. We have looked at assessor parcels maps. We've looked into preliminarily some of the ownership issues there. We don't find that the port actually owns those lands. It's for one of the specific parcels that the port that was brought up. It's actually owned by a private entity called Port LA Distribution Center. So I can understand some of the confusion, but based on our research, we're not seeing some of the facial violations of the port's grant through these permits. So with that said, when you ask what can we do as a commission, we can reach out to the city. I think we've heard a lot about this, the city's involvement in some of the decisions that are made or have not been made when it relates to this facility and the impacts it may have to the community. We can also reach out to the California Attorney General's office to ask them their opinions on some of the legality as it relates to our jurisdiction in this area. But in terms of taking specific steps to overturn what the Port of Los Angeles has decided, we just don't have the authority to do that.
Very good. Well, now I appreciate your preamble that people are not necessarily going to like your response. Right. So, look, with that in mind, you know, there's an opening in what you've suggested that we can lean in, at least get some clarification from the Attorney General's office. You seemingly, by nature of your comments, are suggesting that's not only a possibility, but a willingness, if indeed encouraged and or directed. But we're more collaborative in that, encouraged. And a willingness to the extent that you care about your state, not just your current role as a fiduciary of state lands, to the extent we can engage with the city and continue the dialogue and see how we can be helpful and resourceful, that you're open and willing to do that as well. Is that what I heard?
Yes, I serve at the will of the commission, so of course I'm willing to do that.
The elected official on that side of the aisle. Yeah, I mean, look, this is tough stuff. We've been, you know, as you suggested, we've been at this since 2014, at least as a commission, more formally with a number of hearings. And, you know, there's been a lot of correspondence with my office and others. A lot of it, you know, it generates a little heat, not a lot of light. But a little heat because I get the frustration, and you know there's 16 plus jurisdictions out there that have I would argue a little more oversight, legitimate, many of them substantively more oversight than state lands. So I appreciate willingness to engage us, and I applaud that. But one should not overpromise. This is not an agency that's immune from making big, tough, bold decisions. This is an agency that organized the closure of the last remaining nuclear plant in California. We just announced today the last sand mining plant of its type in all of North America. We also, as you may have heard, been involved in the closure of some large offshore oil platforms. These are all without precedent in some time in this state, and this commission and its current body has been substantively involved in those things. So we're not timid, is my point. And so I take responsibility absolutely in this issue very seriously. And to the extent we can lean in and use our moral authority, if not our formal authority, to effectuate some closure here in the context of concern and or ultimate remediation as it relates to the actual facility, then I'm willing to lean into that. And so the extent that we could more formally request some clarification on our specific jurisdictional responsibility, I think that could be helpful, and why not? Let's get that information. It sounds like you have done justice, and I'm going to trust that we have to reviewing, as you have suggested, these other issues as it relates to violations or other jurisdictional opportunities we can to look under the hood as it relates to the rail lines and the like. I don't know, Commissioner, where you think we can go from there beyond this, but I'm all ears, and I'm willing to work with you and collaboratively to do so.
No, and thank you. And I think getting the clarification from the Attorney General is certainly something we can do and could be helpful at the state level. I still am very focused on what can happen locally, because frankly, I think part of how we got to this point was really not having a process that brought people together, brought parties together, that really looked pretty comprehensively at a risk analysis that included a high degree of transparency that involved all stakeholders. And this commission, I think this current composition of the commission is very stakeholder driven. And I'd like to encourage the local officials at the port and at the city to elevate this to where perhaps the next step could be thinking about what a risk analysis could look like that could be, just comprehensive, public, and really involve all the stakeholders. Obviously, we can't direct that, but it's something I think could really help, really quell a lot of the, well, actually, would get us some good information, for one, and two, really begin to get everyone's arms around, just how serious these risks are and how to prioritize them in terms of how those risks get addressed. So, I mean, this has been in place for decades. And because of the exemptions that were grandfathered in, there was never an opportunity to have that happen. And to say now that you have regulatory agencies coming in and there are no serious, violations, I mean, it's kind of, what are we measuring that against? And so I do think a risk analysis for us to encourage that might be appropriate.
Here, here. Well, I agree with that, and it was pointed out, and I appreciated it that you and I in particular are wearing different hats, not just members of this commission and body, and we have a greater responsibility of sorts on behalf of the rest of the state to encourage and perhaps flex a little muscle there. So I think that's speaking individually, not as a member of the State Lands Commission. I think that's certainly within our jurisdiction, and that's a broader mandate. And so I think in the spirit of your comments, I take them accordingly, and I look forward to working collaboratively with you in that stead. And so, that's, look, I don't know what more we can say at this stage. I appreciate, again, everybody taking the time, particularly through all the technical difficulties. And I appreciate all the emotion, and these are tough issues. These are life and death. I hear that. I mean, and folks living in and around this area, we get it. I get it loudly and clearly. And so let's see what more we can do, and we'll step that up. And I think this has been very constructive. And hopefully we'll get response from the Attorney General's office and make that public very soon. And we'll continue to pursue whatever remedy we can to address some of these legitimate concerns.
Can I add one more thing, Mr. Chairman? I appreciate the diverse array of folks who actually provided public testimony today, and really appreciate people taking their time. I do want to say, and this has been a big focus of this commission, that I hope that whatever we do going forward has a very vital and critical environmental justice component to it. Obviously, many of you have been involved in this issue for a long time, but we also know that there are emerging communities that probably are feeling even greater impacts or feel like they're at more at risk that should be at the table as well. So just to reiterate that I'd like to see that aspect of it addressed in terms of any analysis or process going forward.
Appreciate that, particularly in light of the fact it's one of our agenda items, a broader issue of environmental justice. So, amen. All right, well, with that, this was an informational item, so there is no action at this moment by the commission, but there has been a direction, and I'm grateful for the conversation, dialogue, and the public input. We'll move now back or around or sideways. I don't even remember where we are. Item number, is it 83? Yes. That we're on? Very good, and that's another informational presentation.